We are going to do today interviews with two distinguished experts who are going to help us talk about the topic of digital skills, especially for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. We are in the midst of a historical crisis, the COVID-19 crisis. All of us are trying to work from home in a lockdown. Of course, the biggest question here will be if we are actually, the citizens, the employees, if we are ready to embrace technology and digital solutions in our daily working routine. If our schools, for instance, are ready to embrace these technologies, our administrations, and so on. I would like to start from an index that the European Commission developed, the Digital Skills Indicator, which shows that 57% of Europeans have sufficient basic skills. And so there's a big portion of people who apparently do not have such skills. And I think I'm personally realizing this these days when I talk to normal people that they have never done a video conference before. So this is really something that is pushing people to adopt technologies in their daily lives. We have the DAISY index, again developed by the European Commission, which forecasts that in the future 9 out of 10 jobs will require digital skills. We have estimates, even before this crisis, that Europe was missing 1 million ICT specialists in the market. Back in 2015, we knew that European companies, 40% of them reported having difficulties in finding employees with the right skills, and the figure of 40% rose to 53% just in 2018. So you see the path. So of course, the picture is what it is. We need to ask the questions, and we need to try together to find the solution. So with this discussion today, with an expert from the European Commission, Mr. Andrea Glorioso, who is a policy officer in the European Commission DG Connect, so the Director General, which is in charge of really the ICT technologies, and he in particular deals with digital skills topic. And then I have Dr. Stelian Brad from Romania. Stelian is a professor and an entrepreneur himself. He is very much involved in the work of a cluster in Romania, which is the Cluj-Napoca cluster called Cluj IT. Cluj is a very fast-growing area which has a lot of software companies. So he is certainly well placed to give us an insight about the state of the IT industry and also the users, SMEs, at least in his area, but I'm sure he's knowledgeable also about situations in other countries. So the questions we will try to focus have to do with excuse me, how can people continue working under the lockdown? What are the skills that are necessary to work under this situation? And how can we jointly develop solutions and measures to navigate Europe's economy through the crisis? Okay, what's going to come after the crisis in the long run? How can we ensure that employees and European companies, especially SMEs, are fit for the digital age? Let me also mention that there is a very nice campaign that the European Digital SME Alliance launched just weeks ago. It's called Digital Solutions in Times of COVID-19 Crisis. This is an online catalog of digital solutions offered by European companies, European digital SMEs. It's a bottom-up initiative, right? It started really from the companies themselves as an act of solidarity. We now have more than 200 companies from all over Europe which have published on this online catalog their solutions. These go from solutions for smart working, video conferencing, but even things like e-health or e-learning, but then also using special technologies like blockchain to secure anonymized transactions, for instance, or artificial intelligence. This is all online under digitalsme.eu/solutions. It is there, it is available for the citizens, for the businesses, and for the governments to as a help to digitize. Many of these solutions are for free, others are not. But it is there. It's a great choice, and it is all made in Europe. And this is what really matters, because making IT technologies in Europe is really the key also for the future sustainability, of Europe's economy and society. So let me perhaps start with Stelian Brad, which I introduced. Is a professor and entrepreneur from Romania. Stelian, what do you think this COVID-19 crisis, is it really a game changer? Is it now really this crisis going to push the SMEs, the small businesses, to adopt new digital technologies more than they were doing before? Is it really going to motivate to invest in upskilling their people? To change the way of working in general. So is it really a game changer? What is your opinion?
Yeah, thank you for this very good question. I may ask you to let me just a very short introduction, just for better positioning of my answer for the audience. The idea is we have to think even this crisis as well as the behaviors of organizations in a holistic way. So we cannot answer very, let's say, sharp, specific to this question without understanding this issue that organizations act according to a culture. Culture is the way of doing things. And yeah, we talk a lot in the past about doing better quality, being, let's say, agile, etc. But maybe with respect to the, let's say, behaviors and dynamics of the markets. But now we see, we never thought seriously as companies, as organizations, in terms of resilience and business continuity plans in case of, let's say, pessimistic of critical scenarios. So this is the issue, because from a cultural perspective, which is, let's say, and direct actions to the way of organizations to be set up in terms of processes, in terms of operating models, they realize with this occasion that there are a lot of dysfunctionalities in their processes, in the supply chains, in the value chain. And therefore, this crisis actually acted or is acting, because it's not finished, unfortunately, yet, as a way of repositioning the perspective of the way we are doing business. And companies realize with this occasion there are many dysfunctionalities. We are talking about what is really value in what we are doing and what is not really value.
Stelian, you are talking about the SMEs or the companies that provide technologies, or those from other sectors?
About SMEs in general, of course, about the companies that are providing technologies. This is another story, because in a way or another, IT companies, by, let's say, the specificity of their businesses, were somehow prepared naturally to work remotely.
So they are reacting. They are reacting perhaps better than the rest of the other sectors.
Yeah, they are reacting better. So we even investigated a representative sample of IT companies. So none of them said that they have these functionalities of issues with the processes or the way of doing business. There are some short setups in, let's say, the remote access and other kind of configurations of the system.
And what about their clients, the client SMEs? Are they facing the issue?
That is the issue. That is the issue, because to the end of the day, the technology, the digital technology, is seen as a support for other kind of activities we are doing in different economic sectors, and I'm talking about those SMEs. They found dysfunctionalities in their processes because they thought, yeah, we do the right thing, but now they are thinking, do we really do the right things in the right way?
Do we really do the right thing? Yes.
Yeah, and
Yes.
that is the issue, and because they try to adapt, but not all processes were possible to be covered with digital solution in a very short time. Some of them have also some inertia because some of them said, okay, this crisis will not take very much. Nobody connected in the first glance the health crisis with the economic crisis which is following. So this is another issue, but in many economic sectors, the business activity is lowering with decreasing with about 30-40%, including the IT sector. But you know very well there are sectors when the activity is going down with about 90, even 100%.
Yes, like
Of course,
hospitality, tourism sector,
hospitality,
transport,
etc.
they
But
are.
nevertheless, uh, by the feedback we got from the ecosystem, many of the companies, by setting up even SMEs, I'm talking with the assistance of their IT service providers, set up some processes working remotely, they realize some benefits of doing this. And I like to highlight this. Save a lot of time because in the rush hours, now they do not have to do this. So they are thinking for the future of doing more flexible time schedule for daily work, because you should not have be in the office all the time at 9 o'clock. Many of the things can be done remotely, even maybe morning meetings, and then you can be in the office later on when it's not a traffic jam. And they realize that a big proportion of their processes, especially management, monitoring, customer relationship, can be done remotely. It doesn't matter which is the place. So that is about the culture, about the habit. So with not very significant adjustments and enhancement of their processes, they can adopt digital solutions. And I think this is coming with a very good moment when, yeah, we know very well that the European Commission is encouraging this digital transformation, will allocate in the future exercises a significant amount of funds for digital transformation, and therefore,
Stelian,
yeah.
let me then, because you mentioned the European Commission and their initiatives, let me then turn to the other participant today, Andrea Glorioso from DG Connect, so the European Commission Director General, really in charge of the ICT technologies, and he in particular is a policy officer in the area of digital skills. So, Andrea, you are perhaps well placed to continue from where Stelian left, and I would maybe start asking you, a question which may be a bit atypical because you are a public administration. You're not in the market, but do you, from the perspective of the Commission, have you already seen SMEs, being able to reorient, retrain people, transform, react to this crisis? I mean, Stelian was touching upon that, but have you seen any examples, any success stories, if we can speak about success stories of SMEs reacting to the crisis?
Thank you, Sebastiano, and good afternoon, everyone. And before answering, let me say that I hope that you and everybody who is listening is as healthy and safe as possible in the difficult situation in which we're all in. Look, indeed, the European Commission does not have a full overview of everything that is happening in the markets in member states, whether that's for SMEs or not. We do receive, though, quite a few reports, and we are engaged with various organizations, including Digital SME, but not only, with chambers of commerce. So I would say that our sense is that it is a very difficult situation for the private sector, for people, for the private sector, and for SMEs in particular, who have perhaps less of a buffer to deal with the liquidity crunch, which is a key issue right now. It's the lack of liquidity for SMEs. At the same time, we are seeing incredibly creative ways, a very noticeable resilience by SMEs, and not only the digital sector, as Stelian mentioned, so-called digital SMEs or SMEs which provide ICT goods or services were perhaps already well prepared, as well prepared as you can be in the situation for moving certain processes and organizational processes online. But we're seeing quite a noticeable resilience and flexibility and adaptability by SMEs in general across all sectors. Now, we have to be clear, there are limits to what you can transfer online. If you work in the hospitality sector, if you work in the touristic sector, well, sorry, people want to go on the beach in person. And I think it's going to be quite some time before we get virtual reality technology that allow us to go on a beach from home. So those SMEs, those sectors and SMEs which are active in those and other sectors are suffering, and they're suffering massively. Now, I understand this is not the topic for today's webinar, but it would be remiss of me not to mention that we, and when I say we, I mean we collectively, the union, the member states, we are putting in place massive measures to help those SMEs, which, as I mentioned, basically need right now liquidity. That's what is needed right now, access to credit and access to money, to put it bluntly. Moving back to the core topic of today's conversation on the skill side, I think that in the short term, at least what we see is that in the short term, SMEs are dealing with an emergency situation, so retraining is perhaps not their immediate short-term concern. But it is, at least from our conversation, it is absolutely true what Stelian said. This is also an opportunity, and I use the term between quotes. I understand that it's very sensitive to use the term opportunity in such a moment, but nonetheless, it is also an occasion, let's say, for many SMEs to rethink the way they have been doing things and to understand that now, sadly, many SMEs are touching with their bare hands what it means when your staff is not able to use video conferencing software, is not able to properly use emails. And I'm not talking about abstract realities, as you mentioned yourself, Sebastiano. The sad reality is that Europe still has a large part of the population which lacks even basic digital skills. Now, to be entirely clear, I don't have now the breakdowns, but when we think about people who completely lack basic digital skills, usually those are not people in the workforce. Because in today's labor environment, if you're in the workforce, in one way or the other, you will have had to deal with IT. That's not universally true, but it's certainly true. When we look at the total number of Europeans who lack basic digital skills, we're also thinking about very young people or older people outside of the labor force, and so on and so forth. The issue, nonetheless, is there, but as I said, we see quite a high amount of flexibility. What I must say personally, what I was particularly struck, I live in Brussels, in Belgium, and I must admit, I was surprised that a large number of SMEs or micro enterprises, very small enterprises, active, for example, in the food sector, they were actually very quick to reorient their business. As you know, one of the measures taken in Belgium is that restaurants are basically closed, and likewise, many open markets are closed, except in very specific situations. A lot of these very small companies have actually moved very, very quickly, more quickly than I must admit I would have expected, to using online tools to be able to serve their customers. We're talking about simple solutions like putting a page on Facebook and sending messages around and telling people we can give you orders, we will deliver orders to you, just call us. They're not very elegant, technologically elegant solutions. They're not very sophisticated solutions, but they work. Nonetheless, I must point out, for me personally, I was struck by the fact that, understandably, because in this situation people use what they can use, what they have readily available, the reality is that a lot of the solutions that people had readily available were not European solutions. That's a reality. Now, I know that we will discuss about this later, so I don't want to spend too much time now, but I do want to
Andrea,
say...
Sorry, maybe I could continue on that topic, because I think you touched upon something very, very important. Indeed, we have many SMEs which now relatively quickly moved to use the big online platforms, Amazon, Google, and so on, to make their products and services available online. And this is not something we can complain about. On the other hand, it's certainly good. However, one of the priorities that the new Commission has really set for is Europe's digital sovereignty. So technological sovereignty for Europe, for our companies, our citizens, and so on. So what is your opinion there? Because how can we also make sure that Europe is not just a user of technologies, but it is also a provider of technologies? And how can we, for instance, help really the startups, the SMEs that are digital, are providing those solutions that are out there? What can we do in terms of digital skills to, related to this concept of digital technology? Do you have an opinion on that?
I do. It is a very relevant question. Absolutely. You understand that answering that, if I had a complete answer to that question, I would be the president of Europe and not a policy officer in the Commission. So I will just offer some limited observations on that. The first is that, and we need to be very clear on that, the problem is not per se, at least from our perspective, the problem is not per se whether certain tools that have been used in the past or being used now are European, non-European. It's sometimes not immediately easy to understand what that even means. But there is a point to be made that sovereignty is ultimately about the ability to take and have control over your own decisions. And a scenario in which we are relying too much on technology over which we do not, as Europeans, we do not have ultimate control or immediate or ultimate control, it opens scenarios which have not materialized so far, and again, to be very clear, but it opens scenarios which are not very pleasant. Because without naming names, but if tomorrow a platform which a lot of SMEs rely on in order to provide their services, and even more so in the time in this particular situation which we are, decided, well, you know what, I want to advantage American companies or Chinese companies over European SMEs, so I'm going to give more bandwidth or give more visibility to those companies. That is problematic, of course. Now, to complete the answer, that would actually be illegal currently under European rules, thanks to the platform to business regulation, which we have in place. So platforms cannot really advantage in such a blatant way companies over others. So they need at least to be very clear. The point I'm trying to make here is that ultimately companies, SMEs, etc., will choose the solutions that are convenient to them. So there is a point to be made on the supply side. The European tech sector has, by the way, a lot of technologies that we're using today were originally born as Europeans, including Skype, yes, for example, just to make one example. Again, that's a very long and complicated discussion, so I'm not going to open it here. There is a supply dimension. The European tech sector has to be able to provide good solutions, cheap solutions, easy-to-use solutions, and I think that public authorities can help by facilitating access to capital, access to credit. On the other hand, there also has to be an entrepreneurial spirit activity by European companies, which in some cases is there, in some cases it's not. The other dimension, which is also very relevant in the conversation we're having today, if you look at the history of very successful tech ecosystems throughout this, I'm not only thinking about digital technologies, I'm thinking about technology in general, clearly having a skilled population, both on the supply side and on demand side, is key. Because if you don't have, to go back to your initial point, Sebastiano, and the data that we have, if people don't know how to use certain technologies, they will not have a demand for that technology. So the skills dimension and making sure that these skills are there is key, even in a context in which we're thinking what it means to be sovereign, what it means to be in control of our own technological future, which again, the situation in which we are in today, not because we have had any specific instance, at least I'm not aware of any specific instance in which technology platform from another country, from a non-European country, has made Europeans' life more difficult in this particular situation. To the contrary, I think it has to be recognized that many platforms have actually been helping quite a bit from this point of view. But the key, and to also recall what Stelian said, we have immediate issues to solve, clearly, but we also need to look at what we are going through now, today, in these days, and think whether that can be a bit of a blueprint on how to do things slightly differently for the future.
Okay, thank you. I think you gave a good reply to this difficult question. I would only partly disagree with you that the issues with foreign big online platforms is only theoretical. These issues are really real. If you think about what platforms can do with the data they have, what kind of dominance they can get on the other sectors just by the fact that they have more data than others, and the position they have as the gatekeepers to access the market. I mean, it is very concrete, the fact that there are really practical complaints by companies against Amazon, for instance, when Amazon favors its own products. Or the same is happening with Google or with Apple, because through the access to the apps, when they decide to go into a specific market, they start competing against the same apps that they sell on their marketplaces. And when they start competing with those apps, of course, they make life more difficult to the developers of those apps.
Sebastiano,
yes.
Sorry, just to be clear, very briefly, because there are people listening, so I just want to be crystal clear on this. I agree with you. The issues are very real. Then what I was talking about, and by the way, the Commission has launched a number of antitrust cases on the situation which you described, and we have the platform to business regulation because we saw that there were real issues in platforms favoring their own products. I was specifically referring to the fact that in terms of facing together the immediate crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I am not aware of non-European platforms in that specific instance creating problems to European companies. So my point was on a very specific situation. More broadly and more generally, and then of course we have to see on whether the complaints are well founded or not, but more generally that there are concrete issues. We at the Commission absolutely agree. As I said, we launched a number of cases exactly because we agree that there are concrete issues. Just to be crystal clear.
No, very clear. We agree. Let me continue the conversation on things that actually stem from the EU, from the European Commission, and maybe we could speak about with Stelian about the role of digital innovation hubs. You are running one of these digital innovation hubs in Cluj, which was initiated by your organization, the Cluj IT cluster. So what is your opinion? Do you think this is the right way also to help companies reskilling, upskilling, access technologies, and so on? What is really your recipe for these digital innovation hubs to have a concrete impact on the real economy, on the companies, and on the people?
Yeah, just a few days ago, we had a conversation with authorities, from central authorities, with respect to the relevance of digital innovation hubs in supporting the business environment with services and solutions and training for non-IT companies. And after a lot of arguments, that is the conclusion that digital innovation hubs will play a crucial role for the future in transforming the society towards being more digital. Because one of the important issue or conclusion we have to keep in mind and take away from here is that a significant part of the processes in organizations can be digitalized. And as I said, it is a matter of questioning if we really did the right things, so in the proper way, in a lean way. And now the companies are reflecting of changing things for sure. On when this crisis occurred and people had to stay more at home, that doing the job to the office. We act with some of our company members towards providing services, especially for ensuring unitary communication among people and distributed collaborative work. Also, some of the companies, non-IT companies, ask for giving advices how to use different kinds of platforms which are ready, available platforms. We also contributed significantly to schools and universities with e-learning platforms, also with setting up their infrastructure for connecting. You can imagine what a job to have 20,000 students and 2,000 professors connected in a few days, and then they were able to deliver courses and labs remotely. So this was on one issue, but also we had several actions in terms of supporting the hospitals in these critical times with telemedicine systems, both via internet or mobile applications, connecting the doctors with the community and with the emergency hospitals, even for remote consultancy and diagnosis. So definitely, and another important issue which came up now is about the companies. They realize the fragility of their system in terms of cyber security, because you can connect, but now this is another issue. They are very fragile to being cyber attacks if they are not well prepared. So some of solutions for cybersecurity have been provided in this period to companies that requested this. Nevertheless, I think, and I'd like to emphasize also how important is for all of us to understand the fragility of all the business models we did by now in terms of any kind of economic sectors. Now we have to think more if the supply chain, these global supply chains are really the best solution for us, or we have to think more on nearshoring instead of offshoring of some of the processes, some of the activities. And I'm not talking here on the management and service side, but also on the production side. And from my perspective, I'm in the same line with what you mentioned. I think we have to take care developing such an infrastructure to be able to develop, let's say, geographically speaking, value chains in European Union, then thinking to all the issues from a global perspective. Of course, considering any kind of good practice rules, but nevertheless, I think this is an important aspect.
Okay, Stelian, to continue with you, if you have the chance now, you have Andrea, who's from the European Commission. What will be your request? In which areas the European Commission could support or should support the SMEs during this COVID crisis? We heard about the liquidity crunch. Of course, this is a very clear case. But do you have an idea, a view on what support you think SMEs need right now from the Commission?
For a very short term, I think we had also some talk with companies in the clusters around how, for example, our government, our authorities can help the sector in this situation. And of course, we came up with some conclusions, with some proposals. But nevertheless, one important issue which an institution such national governments or European Commission is able to do on the short term is to provide grants for digital transformation of companies, to provide incentives for those companies that will invest in digital transformation, in digitalization. Incentives are very important triggers, and companies will react in this respect because they, in my opinion, they realize the necessity of having their activities more digitalized from different considerations. And of course, I think European Commission should think more be on firmity, being more firm in doing regulations. You know, many times culture or habits or behaviors are changing when regulations are in place. If we or our institutions, because they in principle should have, let's say, more comprehensive information than, let's say, an SME or an individual. But if this institution understand the criticality not only of this, let's say, crisis, but we have to think to several other, let's say, worse scenarios, such as this climate change, other kind of situations that could occur. We have to be prepared in terms of being resilient, and this means a reconsideration of the economic models. What type of things on long term, of course, or medium term, we have to encourage. And if I said, if on short term, these incentives and also guarantees for loans on investment and on working capital for companies, that would be a great support on short term. But for medium term, we have to come up with public policies to have a resilient economic model, meaning thinking more on a robust growth, not on fast growth. Robust growth. What is robust? What is durable growth? And what kind of noise factors will enter in this economic model to make this robust? And then we realize that, for example, it is less important to put taxations on the workforce, but maybe on raw materials, on transportation, on energy, other kind of stuff that in the future will reconsider the value chains being more, let's say, regional than global. And then in many respects will solve, in case of crisis, different dysfunctionalities we are facing now. And I'm not going to exemplify what kind of dysfunctionality, because we saw on media in terms of supplying of different consumer goods and other stuff for hospital, etc., from those markets where people produce this. And we saw that just thinking to the not to the communities, but only to the investors is not enough. We have to have a complete circle of all stakeholders in this economic model.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stelian. I think it is very clear. You maybe we could then with those reflections go to Andrea and ask if he has any reactions to those. One immediate thing that I could think about, because I heard that yesterday from a European Commission representative, Stelian mentioned grants for digital transformation of companies, and I heard more or less exactly the same thing yesterday by a colleague of yours who was speaking about what she mentioned. She called digitalization vouchers. There is this idea to use regional funds that are part of the EU budget to give digitalization vouchers to SMEs, such that they can go to a local IT provider, an SME or another provider to digitalize. So with this and other possible ideas you have in mind, how could you react to what Stelian just said, Andrea?
Yes, thank you, Sebastiano. By the way, I very briefly lost your audio for a moment there, so I hope I did not miss. I understood the beginning and the end of your intervention. So Sebastiano's intervention, I hope I didn't miss anything major. But to react to Stelian's intervention, which I heard in full, let me say there is a lot that I agree with in Stelian's intervention. There are a few things that, respectfully, it's not that I disagree. I think the devil is in the details, and we need to be a bit careful when we move in certain directions. But let me start with what I agree, which is always a better way to start any conversation, which is the importance of trying to look at the situation in which we are in terms of what it means for a sustainable and durable approach to economic and social development. And this resonates very well, including, by the way, when it comes to education and skilling of the workforce. One of the things I personally do at the Commission is focusing not only on digital skills, but on labor issues more generally, which go beyond the skills and education and training dimension. Now, I don't want to, I'm not here to sell what the Commission does, but I have to point out that well before we were in the very unfortunate situation in which we are, the Commission launched a very ambitious Green Deal, exactly because we very clearly, which by the way has its roots also in the previous Commission, but politically was the President von der Leyen, which clearly put on the table the priority of sustainability for our economy. I think it's also important to recognize, and this goes to, it's not a disagreement with Stelian, but we need to contextualize what we're talking about by remembering that the Union, the European Union, is a union of people represented at the European Parliament, and it's a union of states represented by the member states' governments. And a lot of things that we are discussing, when it comes to a lot of things that we are discussing, including what possibly could be done, the European Commission, the European Commission representing the executive of the Union has a political and legal responsibility, and we take that very seriously. There are also responsibilities of member states. And there are member states which right now, as we talk, are, sorry to say, but are using the crisis situation in which we are to roll back on the Green Deal, to roll back on the plans for digitalization. The argument is basically, well, we have other things to worry about. It's not the time to think about the mid and long-term sustainability of our economic and societal models. My answer to that would be, well, this is exactly the moment to think about that, exactly because we can see what happens, including to SMEs, when our models are not sustainable enough. The point where I wouldn't say necessarily I disagree with Stelian, but I would urge some caution. I think that a deeper analysis is needed is when we talk about the value chains or the regionalization of value chains. Now, it is very clear, and here I fully agree with Stelian, I don't think that enough people realize how delicate our global value chains are. This situation has very clearly shown that it takes very little for stuff to not work anymore. And I think that people on the street are now realizing, I mean, SMEs, probably some SMEs knew that, some others, I'm not so sure, but certainly everybody is now realizing because they go to the supermarkets and they don't find stuff on the shelves of the supermarkets and are starting to ask questions. Okay, who is producing the stuff? Where does it come from? How does it get to Europe? Who's paying for that? So these are all good questions that we should ask. I'm not entirely convinced that the response to that is regionalizing every single value chain out there, because in some cases it literally does not make economic sense to do it, so we would end up paying more. In other cases, because we do not have the workforce, and this is something that SMEs tell us a lot, by the way, that whether SMEs would like to regionalize value chains or not, the labor force is just not there. How do we solve that? The European Commission cannot wave, or anybody for that matter, we cannot wave a magic stick and make the labor force appear. So I just want to be very clear on this point. I'm not disagreeing that we need to look much more carefully at our global value chains, including, by the way, and I use the term in a very technical sense, and I always feel that it can be misinterpreted, so bear with me. There is also a human value chain. In terms of human capital, of human skills, where do we find the labor force? Do we have in Europe the labor force that we need in order to be fully independent? That's also part of the value chain dimension. And that's, it's all the discussion on how do we ensure that people now and in the future have the right skills or not. But my point here is it's a very understandable reaction in the situation in which we are, to start thinking, well, then we have to produce our stuff ourselves, where stuff is anything. In some cases, it makes sense. I think that, and the Commission recognized, President von der Leyen said it very clearly, we were not prepared. Collectively, we were not prepared for this situation. That's a reality, and we need to take some lessons from that reality. Does that mean that from tomorrow we will, in Europe, all SMEs have to start producing surgical masks? Obviously not. That would be ridiculous, and you cannot easily change an SME which was active in the touristic sector to produce surgical masks. So we need to find a balance. Personally, that's my personal view. What I think is much more important is that we enforce, we decide what the rules are in Europe to ensure fair competition, to ensure that people, that the labor force, we have the right labor force, also with the right protections for the labor force. And then we are very aggressive in enforcing these rules against competitors, whether within Europe, the European Union, or outside of the European Union, so that the competition is really fair. I don't think, to be entirely honest, that this, and I'm not saying that this is what Stelian is arguing for, by the way, but I want to point out that there are people out there who are arguing for not even a regional value chains, but national value chains. And that's where we need to be very, very important, because I'm sorry to say, but there is one thing that I learned in almost 15 years working at the Commission, is that the passage from globalization is bad, therefore we need to regionalize. The passage from that to regionalization is bad. Therefore, we need to nationalize and we need to do things nationally. It's a very short passage to go from there to there. So I'm suggesting that in this discussion, and that's not good for SMEs, by the way, because once you do that, SMEs also lose access automatically, almost automatically. SMEs also lose access to other markets. So all I'm saying is it is an important issue. We need to think very carefully. We are thinking very carefully about it. But we also need to be extremely careful what we're asking for, because we might get it and it might not be what we actually need in the medium and the long term.
Thank you, Andrea. On this one of these topics that you and Stelian just touched upon, I'd seen a couple of days ago an open letter by Giorgio Armani. Okay, we are moving away a bit from the ICT sector. But Giorgio Armani is the iconic personality in the fashion industry. And he sent this open letter writing that the COVID crisis, maybe this is a good opportunity for fashion industry to go back, to slow down a little bit, and to go back to make garments that last. So stop making garments that are in a shop just for 3 weeks, and then they are replaced. We write that with garments which are pretty much the same, just its details changed because the market is fast. You need to follow these dynamics. And instead, wouldn't it make sense that we make garments that last? So this is the issue of which you mentioned, of course, the sustainability, the circular economy, and shouldn't this be? I think it's very, very interesting that he says this right now, and I think shouldn't this be perhaps. Circularity and sustainability, shouldn't this become really the drivers of the new economy, or what we want to build after this thing? Yes. It's very enlightening to see that even the business leaders are already thinking that way, and it's gonna if it happens, I'm not sure it will. It's gonna be a dramatic change, but maybe it is for the good. Anyway, let me continue with some questions more on the topic of today's conversation, which is once again skills and digitalization. From the Commission point of view, Andrea, maybe this is a difficult or provocative question, how do you assess the SME response to the crisis in adopting these digital solutions? What is your feeling about that?
I'll be brief, because I would like to hear Stelian's view, because it's closer to the reality on the ground. Look, as I was mentioning before, we have seen, first of all, I have to be honest, our data is patchy in terms of adoption by SMEs in general, and certainly now, where, to be absolutely frank, public authorities and SMEs have other issues to deal with than reporting to statistical authorities what they're actually doing. So we need to be very clear that the data we have is in this particular moment patchy at best. But we do have more general data, because both as part of the DAISY, the Digital Economy and Society Index that you mentioned, Sebastiano, but also as part of the general statistical analysis that the European Commission through Eurostat does, as well as with other studies, we do have a rough idea. The penetration of ICT in SMEs is uneven, very uneven, depending on the sectors. is very uneven. Across member states. Some member states are very good. In some member states, SMEs are very good in adopting ICT. And again, I'm talking about small and medium enterprises across all sectors. We're not only talking about SMEs in the ICT sector, which by definition are pretty advanced from that point of view. Now we're looking at SMEs across all sectors. So the adoption, the curve of adoption is very patchy, is very uneven. Part of that is linked to the skills dimension, or rather the lack of skills dimension, as we said. Part of that, and I think we need better data from that point of view, better analysis, but our initial assessment, as Stelian himself pointed out, a lot of it has to do with organizational culture, is moving from how things were made 20 years ago, or I come from Italy, where family businesses are still quite widespread realities. Sometimes it's even about I do this because my father did this, or my grandfather did this way, so there is no point in changing it. That's about organizational mindset. And that, I have to be entirely honest, the European Commission has certain powers, but it does not have the power to change people's mindsets. Or rather, if we try to do it, people will probably do the opposite, but I don't even want to go there. So look, to close, to answer your question as best as I can and to try to be brief, I think that European SMEs across all sectors, there is room for improvement, to use a diplomatic term, when it comes to ICT adoption. I think there are clusters of excellence in certain sectors, in certain areas of Europe. And so the question, I think for us, but I think a question for everybody, is how do we socialize those clusters of excellence? How do we transfer the expertise, the experience, also the lessons learned in terms of failures in those clusters elsewhere? That's also one of the underlying reasons and drivers for the European Commission to support and fund and really push for the creation of digital innovation hubs, which Stelian is very much aware as he leads one of those, is to create clusters of excellence and try to understand how we can not so much replicate, but how we can transfer some of the knowledge gathered in those clusters to other SMEs in other sectors, in other parts where perhaps they're not faring as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. I think we are about to close, so maybe I'd like to ask the two of you, starting with Stelian, if you have a last, statement, the last point you want to bring, a conclusion that you want to make after today's conversation.
Yeah. So my idea is that indeed companies, including SMEs, I say it's somehow strange to say had the chance to see where are the gaps in and critical aspects in their business models. Nevertheless, they are now conscious and are becoming conscious for making audits more seriously on the digitalization of their processes. And from this point of view, where necessity for training their employees in operating with the digital solutions will be definitely a priority for the companies as well as for the employees, because even some of the employees realize that their jobs are jeopardized because of their inability to run the work remotely or in a different way. So I'm talking here about all categories of employees, of course, where the digital solutions, let's say, are suitable. Because, but yeah, I would say that even in the production floor, by digitalization, we can keep even this social distance, as you said, less workers being in the floor and monitoring the devices, but many equipments can be remotely monitored by technicians if you are a strong digitalized company. And I'm not talking only in manufacturing, but also in consumer goods production, etc., because we saw very good examples, for example, for bakeries that invested a lot in digitalizations, where there is one person and in rest are robots and automatic system. So, and it is 50 kilometers far away from my city. So, in a small city. So, the answer is yes, it is possible. It is possible to do this. And to conclude, my advice is for the audience, for the SMEs, to think in doing the ways such as to prepare the so-called evolutionary resources. So things that should be kept, and in the situations like this or other kind of crisis, to have the capacity to support the business, maybe for at least few months in terms of financial resources. And this is one of the evolutionary resource. And on the other side is to train the people for every kind of scenarios that would happen, including this capacity for business continuity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stelian. Andrea, what about you? Would you like to say something to conclude, to sum up your views?
Thank you. Just a couple of things. First of all, and perhaps I did not say this enough, SMEs are going through, in this moment, are going through a very difficult situation. And I want to applaud their resilience. As I said, perhaps we should not have, but nonetheless, we were surprised by the flexibility, the resilience that many SMEs are showing. And as a Commission official, I do want to say, to the extent that I can, and I can speak for the Commission, to the extent that we can as the European Commission, we will do our best to support support SMEs across all sectors and across Europe. That's our job. The other thing I want to say is, look, and I don't mean to be too blunt here, although I'm known to be a bit blunt, but I don't want to be too blunt. As I said, I agree with Stelian on the need for sustainability, and with you, Sebastian, on the need for sustainability, on the importance of digitalization, on everything that has been said, with a few exceptions that I mentioned. But we need collectively to put our money where our mouth is. And what I'm referring to, I want to be very specific. In this moment, there is a huge request from all across the board for Europe to do something, for the Union to do something. Fair enough. We need money to do that. In this very moment, we are debating the budget for the next 7 years of the European Union, the multi-annual financial framework, and there are a few member states out there which are arguing for a reduction of the overall EU budget, for a reduction of that budget which would be devoted to digitalization, which would include, by the way, support to the development of digital skills that are so badly needed. There are member states which, not necessarily in the budget discussions context, but otherwise, as I mentioned, are using this opportunity to say, well, then we should stop the whole Green Deal thing, because they never agreed with in the first place. So at the end of the day, we live in democracies, and we should be very thankful for that. So we go in the direction that people want to go, and people have different ways to express their will. My final point, therefore, is simply to say it's fair to request from public authorities, including the European Commission, that they help, that's our job, but it's equally fair then, or it's necessary at the same time, to make sure that all of these public authorities at the union or national level are put in the condition to do it, and money is part of it, not the only one, but money is part of it, and that the political willingness of our citizens is clearly expressed. You want to do X, make sure that your representatives express that willingness.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you very much, Stelian. I understand that this conversation is obviously loaded with many other very important topics that are very much important for all of us nowadays, and we try sometimes to go beyond the skills conversation. But this is good. It's good because it's a public debate, and we wanna make sure everybody can express their opinions. So I would like to thank you very much for your participation. I would like to close here our first interviews online, and look forward to see you all of us who participate next Friday for the next interview that we will have. And thank you very much for your participation. So goodbye.